So, Jill, thanks for joining me again this week.
I know, it's two days in a row. It's good. It's good stuff.
They don't know that it's been 2 days in a row.
Well, that's true. But we know.
But yeah, we do know. So today we're going to have a fun one. We're going to talk about how to create a valuable carrier scorecard. I think the first thing for us to really start off with is, what is it? Base level, what's a carrier scorecard?
Sure. So a carrier scorecard is companies want to implement them to understand how carriers are performing for them. So they measure them in different ways, but typical it's, did it pick up? Has it been appointed? Did it deliver on the appointment time?
So why is that important? I mean, in theory, right? You paid for them to pick up. So why is it important to have a scorecard?
You did.
For a vendor?
You did. I think there are so many demands today on shippers with their customers on making sure deliveries are done and done on time. I think when it comes to negotiating with carriers, people don't often include kind of what are your performance metrics and how am I going to measure you, carrier? And I think it's a really good best practice. Carriers need to understand the expectations of you and what their service requirements are, so that you can come to a mutual agreement that, yes, I can service you as a carrier. It isn't just about what is your rate in this lane. It really, really isn't. And so developing a carrier scorecard really helps you think about your supply chain as it relates to working with carriers and how you're expecting those carriers to perform.
Okay, well then I guess let's get started. How does a shipper create a carrier scorecard?
Yeah, so I think the best place to start is really with your customer requirements. So what is expected at a pickup and what is expected at a delivery? And it's not the same answer across the board. In a lot of industries, customers require different things of them. So lay that out, build the metrics so that you understand what's expected of me as a carrier.
So it's from what I understand, kind of just listening in on client conversations, stuff like that, and listening to you guys, it sounds like there's a ton of variables when it comes to like carriers, especially based off industry and stuff. What are the different variables that, I can't say that word, but what are the different things that kind of pop up for carriers?
Well, and you're right. I mean, you would think that, Joe, why are we even talking about this? Freight needs to pick up and it has to deliver. And why is that confusing, right? But then you start thinking about what are the requirements. So what do I need to do in order to make an appointment? I may have to log on to a portal. I may have to put in PO information. What do I need to do to make a delivery? I may need to bring 3 copies of a packing list. I may need to report to Doctor 3 and not have swing doors. All that is part of carrier performance and carrier metrics. The other problem is, what dates are you going to use?
Right.
And so when you think about, we just talked about kind of what to think about going into a digital environment and the lack of information you have at order level in your ERP. Well, if you're measuring carrier standards or performance on your order dates, they have to be right.
Right.
So it does make it confusing, even though it sounds like a simple thing to measure performance of carrier transit or carrier invoice or carrier audit. It's difficult because you're working with a lot of different variables.
Yeah, so it is extremely confusing.
It is.
Especially when you just think, you're like, it's just A to B. Why is it
shouldn't be confusing.
It shouldn't be this confusing, but
it is.
You need to. And when you kind of sit back to think about it, it makes tons of sense, right? It's because it's just a lot of stuff moving. It's not the simple, it's not like you're only doing this one off. You're doing it multiple times. There's a lot of things. And you love to talk about customer experience. It's very important. So
yeah, so let me give you an example.
Okay.
So let's say you are measuring, you have an order, it has a requested pickup date, it has a requested delivery date, right? And so in the order, you have 4 days between the pickup date and the delivery date. So you're requiring your carrier to pick it up on a Monday and deliver it on Thursday.
Right.
Let's say it's moving in a full truckload lane, but based on the mileage that carrier is going to go, it really is going to take him 2 days. So the carrier doesn't want to pick that freight up on Monday. He wants to pick that freight up, or she wants to pick that freight up on Tuesday to deliver it on Thursday, to make that 2-day delivery. Well, does that mean they're late? So if you're measuring pickup performance, if you're saying I tendered you this order on Monday and you picked it up on Tuesday, now, if you're measuring the carrier on pickup performance by your order date, he technically has failed you.
Right.
And that's where the data gets dicey, right? That's where the metric gets dicey, because in that example, that service was met. They met the delivery date, but they changed the pickup date in order to meet the delivery date, right? In order to, as a truckload carrier, doesn't want to hold that freight. So they want to pick it up and drive straight through. But if you just scorecarded off of dates and you didn't have exceptions to rules built, you would have that carrier performing at a loss there because he didn't meet your pickup date.
Right. So, and we're going off script with this. So is
That's okay.
a carrier scarier on Friday the 13th in front of full moon, right? Is carrier scorecard.
It's one of those days.
Yeah, really. It's
been
full
a long
moon, right?
one.
Everyone's going crazy. It's really to help you understand what a carrier's doing, more or less, right? In the sense of, hey, they like a full truckload doesn't want to pick it up and just wait 4 days to get something there that takes 2 days. So that's why you're creating this scorecard?
You're creating the scorecard to make sure your carriers perform in the right way.
Right.
And then you have the ability, when you're working strategically with your carriers, you want to be able to sit down with them, talk about pricing, yes, but you also want to say, look, at this month, we've tendered 1,250 shipments to you. And of that 1,250, you delivered 10% of them late. And these are the details on the late deliveries. Why? You want to have some metrics in place that will say, we're not going to work with a carrier who can't make on-time delivery 90% of the time,
Right.
Whatever your criteria is. And if you don't measure it, you don't know. And you may be getting pressure as a supply chain person. Well, we want you to use this carrier all the time because their rates are so good. But that carrier on a service perspective isn't a good carrier. They're not a good service carrier. So if you're measuring performance, you have the ability to say to someone who might be putting that pressure on you, look at, we can use this carrier, but 35% of the time they're going to fail us based on our carrier metrics and how we're measuring performance.
So it's more of like, it's carrier scorecard, while it helps externally, it's really an internal it's kind of that thing in your pocket when you're going to other groups and other divisions within your organization to be like, no, here's our scorecard. Here's what we value. Here's what we measure.
Right.
This is what it is.
Yeah. And then here's the other problem is if you're a client shipping to big box retailers and you're a company and you're shipping to grocery warehouses in the food industry, or there's so many requirements on that appointment delivery. And if you don't make that delivery under the criteria that you've agreed to with this customer, they charge you back. So what happens is you're measuring the carrier performance to potentially prove your customer wrong, that no, we didn't fail you, our carrier didn't fail you, this is inaccurate, and you need to reimburse us on the chargeback. So there's like whole departments built now to address this chargeback problem. And as a result, more than ever, you need to be measuring carrier performance.
So I think that brings us back to the whole creating it. And dates are important, right? Dates are a big thing. But I think what you just hit on, especially with stuff like chargebacks from big box retailers, talk about delivery. What do we exactly call it? Delivery requirements.
Right.
What are the different delivery requirements you should be putting into your scorecard?
Sure. And, the other thing with carrier scorecarding is if you go through the kind of painstaking process of setting it up, you learn a lot about your supply chain, which I think is really important. So you start talking about delivery requirements, and you want to look at it at a lane level. Target's a great example. So Target has DCs all over the place, right? And if you deep dive, you're asked to, they're going to give you an appointment date. They're going to give you an order that says you have to deliver on this day. A lot of times you're delivering to Target every week. And so if you deep dive their DCs, what you will learn is that in one distribution center, you have to drop full trailers of freight. So if you're shipping LTL, you give it to a carrier, they hold that freight until they have a full load, and then they drop that trailer. Now, when they drop the trailer, Target's not signing for all of those different shipments. They're unloading it at their leisure, and then they're turning in the proof of deliveries that, yes, we've received all these shipments in, carrier, and here's all your delivery receipts. That could be days after the carrier's dropped the trailer. So now you're being measured on hitting that appointment delivery. Well, if you don't get a signed delivery receipt in time and you can't measure the dropped trailer day, you may, in fact, get charged back when you actually did exactly what you were supposed to do. The other thing that happens that we see is there's a Target DC, another example, not to slam Target, but then there's another example of one of their DCs, you have to drop trailers only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And if you have anything that's 12 pallets or under, you're required to live deliver. So if you're a shipper and every week you ship to that Target DC and every week they give you the requirement to deliver on Wednesdays, but you have more than 12 pallets and the requirement of the carriers, they can only drop on Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're set up to fail every time.
Right.
You get a chargeback every time.
Right.
So that's what that information, you then go back to your sales team and say, look we've got to figure this out by lane with this customer because what their distribution centers are requiring of the carriers are very different than the rules that we've agreed to. And when we agree to these rules and we can't perform under these rules, they're charging us back. So your hands are literally tied behind your back. But again, if you start this carrier scorecarding process, the goal is that you get carrier performance. Right. The other thing is you learn a whole lot about how your customers operate, how you've developed your customer rules, but then actually how deliveries are being made. And you may find one carrier can meet the service requirement that you've agreed to from a customer versus another. And again, developing all of the crucial key metrics that you want to measure and figuring out how to scorecard it with a carrier, it exposes all of that.
Right. So there's not really a template for a carrier scorecard. It's really what are the rules that you as an organization have put in place.
So you sound like our data science team because I drive them crazy because they say, well, it's data. We have these data inputs. We have these dates. We have these carriers who also electronically provide these tracking date messages to us. It's standard across the board. It's not. I wish it was. Yeah. And part of it is, okay, so let's make the standard. We're going to use order dates. You have a requested pickup date and a requested delivery date, and that's what we're going to use to measure carrier performance. Well, if those dates are wrong, and oftentimes in companies' ERP system at order level, they don't know yet when it's going to ship and when the customer wants it. So they give you kind of blanket dates. Yeah. And now you're scorecarding off those dates. That doesn't work. And in industry, in some industries, pickup matters most. They're booking their sales the day that shipment leaves the door, but there's no real urgency on the delivery. So for a client like that, they're measuring pickup performance is far more critical to them than delivery performance. And the exact opposite is true for someone else.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's to create a valuable carrier scorecard. Mm-hmm. It's not just pick dates, pick delivery requirements, think of that. It's really invest in what your company is going to value. Not just for carriers, but also your customers, what's going to make the most sense. Because in theory, this is an internal document more than anything. You're going to show everyone.
Yep.
Is there tools or technology that makes this easier? Because it sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. With technology, it's a whole bunch easier, right? So if you're in a TMS system, you now are getting this tracking, messaging, invoice, all of that information in a digital environment. So you have the ability then to a lot easier manipulate those digital fields to say, here's how I'm going to measure these dates. Here's how I'm going to measure performance, not just performance on did it pick up, did it get appointed, and did it deliver? But did you send us an invoice timely? Mm-hmm. And when you sent us that invoice, carrier, was it right? Because let's be honest, I hear people still talk about, well, we have X amount of % of audit savings. If you're finding errors in your carrier invoices, it's because they're not rating correctly, they're not invoicing correctly, and that's causing you more work. I would much rather see an invoice come in right every single time from a carrier versus, running around saying how lucky we are that we found all these audit savings, because that is a lot of time and a lot of labor, which is money, right? So let's get it right the first time. So we scorecard, we measure not just carriers, pickup, appointment, delivery performance, we measure their invoicing performance. That's all part of our kind of strategically working with carriers to determine who's going to be the best fit. It's service first. And if you can't scorecard your carrier and measure their service, how do you know what the right carrier is to use?
And especially with technology, we talk about it all the time, but there really isn't a standardization amongst carriers. So that's something you got to kind of keep in mind with this is it's like what technology, what can they provide you more than anything? Because you can't.
So just make it harder, Kyle. So you're 100% right. So, one, you got to develop what am I going to measure? Mm-hmm. And do I have the right data to measure it? What dates am I going to measure off of? what are my transits? How am I going to measure what my customers are asking of my carriers to do? You're going to figure that out.
Right.
And then got to figure out, where am I going to measure it? So if you're not in a transportation management system and you're not being fed API technology for track and trace or EDI technology for invoice, then you're building maybe some kind of Access or Excel document. And how do I measure in there? Which is dicey, right?
Right.
And then from there, if you're in this digital environment, you've got to figure out, even in the manual environment, what is the carrier going to be able to feed me so that I can measure it in the way that I need to report internally on performance and also work with my carriers on performance. And that gets tricky.
So in your opinion, should you be doing scorecards for every single shipment for a carrier, or is this kind of sort of like a every quarter, yearly type of thing? What do you?
I think you scorecard. If you build the tools to do the scorecarding, you do it every day at a shipment level.
Right.
And then maybe you report on it monthly. And maybe you meet with your top tiered carriers every other month or quarterly to review performance. Barring, if you have a carrier that's not providing service, they've just got to go and you got to find somebody else. But the other thing we didn't talk about is the scorecard allows you to dig in, because you may find that you're shipping to a customer who requires drop trailers, and they're in Dallas, Texas, and the carrier you're using has 26 trailers dropped over there, and the customer won't release the trailers, so they can't show delivery appointment that has been made, right? Meanwhile, this customer is screaming at you, the shipper, saying, you're not getting my freight delivered. So it helps you pinpoint areas of service where you need help. And I keep kind of bashing these hard customer deliveries, but the carriers screw up too. And you may find you're using a long haul carrier and they're doing such a great job. And there's this one area in upstate New York that they continue to fail on. So overall, your percentages are high in terms of overall percentage of service, but this one area isn't. And it gives you the opportunity to really dig in and say, they're just not doing a good job here. And come to find out, that carrier may have lost some business that was really keeping the flow of the transit moving in that lane.
Right.
And those are the discussions you're having now with carriers versus, well, your overall service performance is down. Well, where is it down and why is it down? And that's where the carrier scorecarding can help. And I think people are afraid to say this, but carriers don't want all the freight you can give them. And they really don't. They will tell you they do. They will say, give me all the freight you have. But the reality is they don't. They don't all operate the same way. And there's lanes in freight that's really good for one carrier that isn't good for the other. And so if you've drilled down really deep and you're measuring carrier performance, you're having really meaningful discussions with your carriers, and they're going to tell you what works for them and what doesn't. We love when a carrier calls us and says, don't use me right now in this lane because my capacity is over capacity. I'm not going to provide good service. And it gives us the ability to react before we bring on, we present an RFP to a carrier on behalf of a client. We already know where they're struggling, right? Right. So we have a very good insight on making some recommendations for our clients. Our clients decide who they want to use, but we have the ability to make these recommendations. And it's because we've put in these KPIs and these metrics on scorecarding. We have real meaningful discussions with carriers, not what's your rate. It's what's your service and how you doing on capacity, what's your line haul looking at. And so if you're a shipper, you're scorecarding your company. Imagine someone like us. It's so much fun to me. Like, we have all of these clients shipping all of this freight. So we're scorecarding carriers on a much bigger scale.
Right.
But if you solely are responsible for it, or your organization, you got to start doing it, because I'm telling you right now, you're going to get a better experience with your carriers. You just are, because you're going to really understand them better. And you're understanding them better because you put yourself in a best practice to say, I'm going to scorecard my carriers. I'm going to do it the right way.
So it does have a little external feel with it. It's not just internal. There's that carrier relationship that you kind of get to manage, because they know that you're actually trying to scorecard to make sure that it's not just they didn't pick up, their rates are too high, they suck.
That's right. And here's the other thing that's so cool, and we do this, oh my gosh, it happens all the time, where, again, shippers ship to customers repeatedly over time. And those are their big customers, the customers they care a lot about. And so we'll have a client shipping, and they'll say, I ship to these three 3 customers every week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Well, we know the carriers they're using, and we'll say, you know what, if you could work with the buyer at that customer, and instead of doing Tuesday and Thursday, see if they can do Monday, because that carrier delivers over to that facility every single Monday. So the shipper can then go back to their customer and say, you know, I know you're looking for Tuesday, Thursday, but our carrier, which is a carrier, an in-house carrier that's already delivering at your facilities, they're there on Mondays. Would that be okay?
Right.
What a good experience for you and your customer that you know your carriers that well enough.
Right.
I love it. I just love it. We'll talk about it forever.
I know. We were like, this is gonna be a short one. We're gonna go this.
Whip right through it.
I think the last thing before we kind of get into kind of what's upcoming for Aborn and Jill.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a fun question I've always heard, but what was, given all your experience in the field, what was one thing you wish someone would have told you when you went to create your first carrier scorecard? What was something that, like, I wish I would have known about this?
That there isn't a one size fits all.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Again, what's important to one shipper is not important to another, right? And so really understanding internally as a company what you need. Because one thing we never want to do is deliver a reporting process to someone that isn't useful to them, right?
Right.
No one looks at reports that don't mean anything to them. So really understanding I need to measure my carriers on on-time pickup, on-time delivery. Maybe on-time delivery doesn't matter. Maybe it really is just getting it off the dock. Maybe pickup doesn't matter. Maybe it's making sure it delivers. So if you know delivery is the most important and carriers need to maneuver pickup dates in order to meet delivery date, don't measure them on the pickup because they'll fail. If you're using data, they'll fail it. Measure them on the delivery.
It's awesome.
Yep.
That's a great little
Good
thing.
stuff.
All right. So wrapping up, I think
Okay.
the big thing we want to talk about is Transtech 2020 on October 10th in Boston. Give a little preview about what this whole forum is going to be about.
Yeah, so excited for Transtech. If you're interested after you hear my little spiel, please reach out to us. You can find me on LinkedIn. We wanted to get together a group of curious, like-minded transportation individuals and talk about this stuff we're talking about, you know, talking about challenges in our industry, about technology, trying to use it in our industry. And so we decided, you know, we're going to get a group of people together. And this will be our first one. And we're calling it Transtech 2020. We've got a bunch of companies that are going to join us. You do not have to be a client.
Nope.
This is people who are in supply chain that really want to learn and grow, but also teach, right? I think we're all in a teaching role in our positions. This industry changes all the time. And so the reason we decided to do it is honestly, you know, we try to get ourselves out there and we're networking and we want to talk to people, but they immediately think we're trying to sell them something. And I'm sure everyone has, you've been around, you go to a networking event and you're trying to learn and someone's trying to give you a free pen and, you know, a ball ticket so that they can potentially get your business. So this is none of that.
This is scanning your name badge. They're doing all that type of stuff. None of that's happening at this. This really is. It's truly innovative, hungry, open people. I mean, you're going to learn, but you're going to learn because you participated.
Right.
It's going to be a conversation. There's no sales decks. There's no slide decks. There's no sales people other than our Isaiah, but Isaiah's there to learn just as much as I'm there to learn.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be a fun thing. abornandco.com/Transtech2020. October 10th in Boston at the Harvard Club. So cool little location. I think we're like already planning on getting drinks afterwards. And
we are.
Yeah, it's going to be fall in Boston. It's going to be awesome.
We are very fortunate that Steve is a Harvard alum. So he actually got us the venue space, which is fun. And that'll be our first one. And again, this isn't run by Aborn and Company. We really do want to just pull a bunch of people together and bring ideas. And we can decide as a group where the next venue will be and how many times we want to have them. And again, really just to help each other in our industry.
All right, awesome. So Jill, they can find you on LinkedIn, best place. Okay. Jill Clifford, anything else?
No, that'll do it.
Thanks
for joining.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for watching Consulting Logistics. I loved talking carrier scorecarding with Jill, so I'd love to know kind of, are you guys doing it? What's it like? How's the practice work? Is it a lot of work? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to kind of have that conversation. As always, please like the video, please share it with a colleague, and subscribe to the channel if you want to be notified when we kind of put more of these videos out. In the meantime, thanks for watching. I'm Comic Knot. Peace.